Hi, everybody. I believe we are now live, and as you can see, I'm by myself. There's a little bit of a delay with Vic, John, and Kane. They're actually all together in person, and they're just running a few minutes late. They've had a very busy day, and I don't want to steal their thunder on that. They're probably going to be putting out videos about what they were up to today, so I'm not going to, like I said, I'm not going to steal their thunder. We have a little bit of a topic set up for this live stream, but as is so often happens with sword nerds getting together, things are going to almost certainly go off topic at some point, with the topic mostly still being swords. And while we're waiting for my guests to join me, if you have any questions you want us to talk about, if you have anything you want to say, feel free. I've got chat up. I can go ahead and read it and kind of do a pre-show before the actual show. Let me see if anybody's even joined us so far. Good evening, Russell and 11 Lance. Happy you're here. So I guess what I could do is the first thing sword we're going to talk about is this one. This is the Black Prince from Windlass. I bought this a month, 2 months ago. I believe Vic bought one of them, and there's quite a bit to talk about with this sword, this model, and I'm not going to get into too many details about that yet. But we've got quite a bit to talk about and some stuff to talk about this. It's going to segue into some other topics as well. So this video might actually end up functioning as my review of this sword, because I'm not sure if I'm going to do a full review on it, as a little bit of a teaser for what's coming up in this stream. Octane, you will definitely hear about swords in this live stream. And good evening, Mick Wee Wee. It's an interesting handle. Like I said, right now, Kane, Vic, and Jon are a little bit delayed. They're going to be here momentarily, I would expect. In the meantime, if you have any questions you want to ask or something you want to talk about, feel free to add to the chat. So yeah, the fittings on it are definitely interesting. They aren't blackened. It is actually either a paint. I think somebody else said it. Somebody on Reddit, when I had posted about it, said that it looked exactly like a powder coating that he used to do in a previous job. So I think it's actually powder coating, not chemically or blued or heat blued. It would be nice if it were one of those. Powder coating is tougher than paint, though, so as I understand it. So at least it should be more durable. And as you can see, a little bit of a preview here. I've got a few other swords that I plan on talking about during this video. But you can't really see what they are unless you are really good at identifying swords from very small portions of them. Just practicing cuts with your Valiant Armory Malatesta would highly recommend it. That is a sword that I kind of consider Valiant Armory's signature sword. It's one that is very unique to them. You see it, it immediately looks like Valiant Armory, and it's a sword I would like to get my hands on at some point, hopefully. And I believe we have everybody here. Vic, Jon, Kane, I at least cannot hear you.
We haven't said anything yet.
Okay, there you go.
I mean, there you go.
Now.
Technical difficulties and our lack of speaking.
What did you expect?
Greetings, sir. How are you?
Pretty good. I know you guys have had a busy day. for anybody who's not familiar, why don't we go through and have you guys introduce yourselves since you're on my channel? I would assume most of my viewers know who you guys are, but go for it.
Kane, you want to start?
Hey there, this is Kane from Kane Shen channel, and today we're gonna do a live stream discussing sword IP, right? And we just came back from Angustrin, picking up this awesome sword, right? Type 13B.3.
Nice.
Some cutting session there. Yeah. Managed to beat the traffic.
Barely, just barely.
Yeah, it was a rough ride.
Yeah. What's going on? I'm Vic.
And I'm John, and we are both from Unsheathed Sword Reviews, and we are extremely happy to be here with two awesome sword channels talking about intellectual property, a very important subject.
It'll be a lot of fun.
You guys kind of jumped the gun a little bit on that, but yes, one of the topics we're going to talk about with the Black Prince is intellectual property in sword design. So, Vic, you have one of the Black Princes, right?
Kane has one. It's here. I have the Royal Armory's sword. Yes.
That's right. That's what it was.
Right?
So,
you can see
this is
very formidable.
There you go.
This is an interesting sword because, like Vic just alluded to, he has the Royal Armories collection by Windlass. That is basically the exact same sword as this. Windlass put this out. The only changes that we've been able to see is that they put this powder coating on the hilt furniture, and then they drilled a recess in the pommel and put in some brass what are they, crosses? Yeah, or clovers, something like that. So as far as we can tell, that's the only difference between these swords. And when I saw it, I was like, well, first off, the price was really good. It was like $300. I think it was right around there. And the Royal Armories one is right around double that. And you do get, with the Royal Armories, you get a scabbard, an actual scabbard, and the Royal Armory scabbards are pretty nice. With this, you get the typical Windlass sheath, which is not so nice. But Vic, I believe Kane had it shipped to you. Is that what it was?
Yeah. Yep.
So why don't you tell me your first impressions? I don't want to be the only one talking here.
Well, so Kane hit us up and was gracious enough. I hadn't even heard that the sword had come out yet. And he's like, hey, have you seen this? And I was just like, no, I haven't. He's like, do you want to review it? And I was just like, obvi, of course I do. So then he graciously sent it to us. And we were eyeballing it and looking at the specs online. And I was like, that looks like exactly the same sword, but we'll see. The second I unboxed it, opened it up, there was zero doubt in my mind. Before I took measurements, which we can get to in a little bit, it is exactly the same thing. It is identical in every way. They just painted it black. And my picking it up, everything about it was so incredibly familiar because I essentially owned the same sword already, the Royal Armory's 14th century sword. So
yeah, we actually did a test where we would close our eyes and hold both swords, one in each hand, and then switch them and see if we could tell the difference. And you can, just because the drilling out of the pommel makes enough of a difference that you can feel it. But other than that, they're exact, and it's still pretty much an educated guess. It's not like, oh, this is definitely the Royal Armories. Blindfolded, they feel like the same sword. They really are the same sword.
Also, the Royal Armory sword's been sharpened, and maybe that did a bit in terms of
solid point.
Because the Windlass swords come pretty blunt, and I had this one professionally sharpened, and they took a lot of material out, so that might affect the balance just a bit. But like John said, it's the same thing.
Also, that does bring up. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I was going to say tolerances between swords. There may be individual differences in the same line.
They measure the blades every 3 inches, the cross section, the thickness, and the width, and they're just basically identical, even with Windlass level of tolerance. So started out very thick, over 1 centimeter thick. Yeah, 10. Right, and 10 tapers down to about 6.5 at a foible. So at every part is virtually identical. Yep.
Yeah. So that's something I wanted to ask, because while we can look at the blade profile and the specs and speculate, the fact that you have both of them on hand is what really helps. And one of the things that was most immediately obvious is that the pommel, this is a unique pommel. It is big. It is much bigger than most pommels of this type that you will see. So I assume you've looked at that, and they are pretty identical, other than that recess.
Here, hold them up, one above the other, kind of, and you can see.
That's the like just from like they drilled out that little bit to put that insert.
Yeah,
Aside from that, it's the same thing.
I mean, even to the degree that the sides are sloped, they're not 90 degrees. So, they are exactly the same piece.
Also, this is the scabbard for the Royal Armory's longsword, and I've been housing the Black Prince in there, and it fits perfectly like a glove.
That pretty much tells you what you need to know right there.
So it seems to me it's the exact same blade. It even comes, the Royal Armory's swords come with a much finer edge than Windlass normally puts on. Normally they have like a 1 to 2 millimeter edge. And then if they're sharp, they'll have a very distinct a huge secondary bevel because that edge is so damn thick. This Black Prince has a very fine edge. It's not sharp, but it's not far from sharp. I know when I got the Wakefield hanger from the Royal Armories, I had it shipped to Matthew Cross to sharpen, and he said the way it came, it was probably able to cut tatami already, even though it didn't actually have a final sharpening. I don't think this one's quite that level, but it is not far off.
Although the longswords, the Type 17 and the 15A, they both have very obtuse angle.
Yes,
because they are so sick. They are close to the original, so even at a foible, they are very sick, and they are just the edge angle are so much bigger than the Wakefield front hanger. The single-handed arming sword. So that's just different, and it takes a lot to sharpen. Because I sharpened the original Royal Armory's Type 17 longsword, and I scuffed the blade. Right? Just as this one. And they are that you're not going to cut with it, even though they're all in the Royal Armories. And the edge on this one, the Black Prince model, is exactly identical as they came. Right?
It's almost like it's the same sword.
Almost.
right. And see, that's kind of what I was going for. Is I wanted to really present the case that these are the same swords, and I want to also say, they are very nice swords. The Royal Armory swords are very well done. They are Windlass's best work, in my opinion. Absolutely. And this Black Prince absolutely feels exactly like the Royal Armories, and it's a great sword. I pick it up and swing it around. It has a ton of sword wind. It's incredibly comfortable to move around. There's this thing that when you're gripping a wheel pommel, a lot of people have issues with wheel pommels hurting the hands. And this is a relatively short grip, so there's going to be some people who complain about that. What I find is that you can actually rest the pinky right on the center boss, and it locks the sword in the hand, at least in my hands, absolutely perfectly. This is the first wheel pommel that I've had that actually really does that. And it's a magical feeling, pretty much. It's great. So, while this is an absolutely outstanding sword, the price is outrageously good for what you get. The problem comes in with, did Windlass clear making this with Matt Easton and the Royal Armories? Because, the Royal Armories collection is a collaboration between Matt Easton, the Royal Armories, and Windlass. The Royal Armories allowed them to put their name on it, gave Matt access to measure the original, and then both Matt and presumably the Royal Armories had a lot of inspection and quality control and making sure everything was put together exactly how they wanted.
Don't forget, they're allowing them to sell in their museum gift shop.
Exactly. That's one of the reasons I believe that they won't sell them sharp, and Windlass will not sell them sharpened. It's a deal with the Royal Armories to help with selling at the museum. So there's a lot
something to do with Indian law too, that they can't export sharp swords from certain regions of India. So I think it might have something to do
without
with
like a different permit or something, right?
Yeah, from what I understand, blunt swords are considered like a reenactment tool or something like that, whereas sharp swords are considered weapons, and they require a completely different license, and the weapon license is much, much, much more expensive. Totally. I believe this is all second and third hand information. Right. So that's really the question: is Did they ask for Matt Easton and the Royal Armory's permission?
Oh, that's
My
easy,
hunch
right?
is no.
If you go to museum replica, could you show it like you're spraying right now, museumreplica.com? It's not there anymore.
The Black Prince is not there anymore?
It's not there anymore. It's discontinued. Yeah. So yeah.
That sounds like it gives us all the answer we need.
Right?
Yeah.
And also, just to build on your point earlier, Kyle, about whether or not they just took the design that they had for the 14th century sword. Correct me if I'm wrong, you and Kane. I know you guys know more about historical swords than I do. But the sword that's called the Black Prince is a Type 15A, but it's a different historical sword than the sword that is in the Royal Armoury's collection that this sword is based off of. So while they're very, very similar, I believe Satan Guard, the other one still has a wheel pommel and stuff. They are different swords.
The base is wider than this one, but the pommel is the same style. Right. Like, it's basically like a mace head.
Right.
Right.
So I think like it would be one thing if they just made a very, very similar sword, kind of taking lessons they have learned. That would be one thing. And we'd be like, okay, they're going to look similar because it's based off a very similar sword. Except that this looks to be exactly the same sword. So
yeah, the Black Prince is definitely slightly different than this sword. This one, I think Matt actually talked about that when he was explaining the Royal Armoury's line, is that it's very similar, but this one's, if I remember right, bigger pommel, beefier blade overall.
Yeah, like heavier, a little bit heavier, I think.
Yeah.
And you're right, Black Prince, nothing. So that implies to me that Matt Easton or the Royal Armouries, I'm not going to speculate on which because I have no inside information whatsoever. That implies that they complained to Windlass and said, why are you jacking our design? Why are you undercutting our product? Because that's what it comes down to, in my opinion, is that Windlass decided they could take extra blades that they had for extra hilt furniture, all that, slap it together, make the most minimal changes they could, and sell it at half the price.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, there's it's so hard to know because we are speculating about a company in India, individual in the UK, and a museum in the UK. We don't know the details, but there's no doubt whatsoever in my mind that it is the exact same sword, and the fact that it's now gone from museum replicas, that's a pretty damning statement.
Yeah. So like I can kind of picture two scenarios. Like one scenario was somehow they licensed this. Matt Easton said, okay, I license you to make this sword with my design after a certain amount of months or after a certain amount of units sell or something. And if that's the case, then there's no foul play here. But the fact that it got yanked off tells me that's not true, which tells me this was IP theft. There's just no two ways to look at it.
The worst kind of IP theft. It's not even stealing from others. It's stealing from yourself
and from your business partner. Why would you?
While they're working on the second match, can you imagine like the kind of effort you have to like drive from Surrey to Leeds, pull the string at the museums.
Yep.
Like you go back and forth to examine the prototypes, to verify them, and then put your seal of approval, put your name on it.
Plus all the museum employees that had to help with that.
You know what I mean? Curators have
all those folks. Yeah.
Right? And again, the backroom deal to examine them. It's
stole their time
to drive. I drive like 2 hours, 2.5 hours to here today.
Yeah.
It's tiring, right?
Yeah.
I don't know whether he takes a train or a plane, but then once you're there, you need to go into the back room and get these antiques out, like 600-year-old artifact, and then measure them. The caliber, you squash them, and you're I don't know how you're gonna live with yourself.
There's
a lot of stress, and while if you don't get it right, and you screw the one chance you have to develop this product, I don't know how you can be more disrespectful to that level of effort, your business partner, while they are working on the second match.
And don't do that. That's so crazy to me because like when you sent me the link to this, Matt Easton posted a video that day that he was in Leeds doing the second batch, and I was like, okay, well, this had to be approved. There's no way because like that's such weird timing.
Because or else the audacity.
The audacity,
the sheer audacity to do that, and like all the things you talked about are completely relevant. Plus, like Matt Easton went to school for a long time to be an expert enough to do this work. And you've
Archaeologist.
stolen,
Yeah.
and you've stolen that from him too.
Yeah.
Not to mention all the time he spent doing HEMA. Like literally, that's a theft of intellectual property. It's a theft of all those people's time and effort.
Yeah.
That's despicable,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah.
So I do want to make a clarification for me. In this specific case, I don't think IP theft is quite the right term.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
It is an exact replica of an existing sword. It's certainly stealing the work of Matt Easton. It
Yes.
is undercutting your business partners to the nth degree. But I don't think Matt Easton or the Royal Armories can claim IP of the sword this was measured off of. But
If they have a contract, it's that they have ownership of the design of these product, exact models, right? But not the others, which is why they sell like just move one of these around, and a number of these, they're not going to pay royalty to them, and they're going to go around the contract because you don't own these models. We're gonna just own all the profit from these,
Right.
But then
You're not giving them their
it's
cut.
exactly sad, right? Like you're exploiting your business.
And while maybe by like the most strict definition, it's not IP theft, and maybe legally they could get away with it, that's still shady as fuck. Right? That's not like, do you really want to like be in business with somebody that's like, hey, I'm going to get away with exactly to the letter what I can get away with?
And you know what? I mean, as I think about that, right? I think about that, and I think about the kind of company that would do that sort of business practice. Then I speculate as to like, what would be their like? Would they stand behind their products? Would I feel like I would have a fair chance? You know what I'm saying? Because that's all ethics, right? Would if they sent me a bad product, would I get a good one back? I don't know. And then
your partner cannot trust you.
Exactly. Why would I trust
you?
Customer.
Seriously.
So if it works out that this is true, that this is what actually happened, and this is what it looks like and smells like, that has an impact for me on how I view Windlass and whether I want to buy their products anymore.
Which it's not like they had the best reputation to begin with. Sorry, Kyle, not to cut you off, but
no, but that's exactly what I was going to say. Is Windlass has a history of doing very similar stuff. Of Windlass will take, it seems to me, they will take contract work for pretty much any brand out there. They will make stuff, but they have very specifically also taken those designs, blackened everything, and made the battle cry line. I mean, have you seen their new Grossmesser?
Yeah.
That is a carbon copy of the Cold Steel one that they make for Cold Steel.
Yeah. Their own.
That's dirty, man.
Right?
That's the battle cry Bosworth, right? Bosworth is Windlass makes the Men at Arms, which we'll review. The Men at Arms series,
all the good ones, right?
For Italian longsword, hand and half swords, those kind of stuff. And it's the exact same of the Italian longsword blade they make for Cold Steel with the hand and half sword. Sorry. The Cold Steel hand and half swords pommel and another slightly different guard.
So it's like a Franken sword based on some parts they have.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
And then I don't know how Cold Steel would deal with them, but that's basically it. And then paint a blade black.
I mean,
and call it a new model.
This is the battle cry, and they've done this with multiple. Their battle cry line, especially, seems like they take designs that they are contracted for with other people. And
Single-handed arming sword is just exact same as the classical medieval sword, but painted black and now sold for $150 more.
I'll stick the sword design and then I'll paint it black.
But you know what? This is funny because it's the same company, right?
That was good.
And if we look at some other cases where like your Ronin katana, they're just going to other people's backyard. We're gonna go to your catalog, see whatever you have. Right. Remember that the Ronin katana new arming sword? Like I sent you before, like we discussed.
Yeah, I will get that up.
Exact same replica of rip-off of Albion Burgundy.
Right. Well, this is getting meta now because the Cold Steel Messer is like sort of a direct rip-off too, isn't it? Of the Albion, like it's very, very similar.
That was originally good.
So now it's like we're looking at a 3-step rip-off.
I mean, I don't know how much like cursory evidence we need for it. It's like, well, there's clearly a pattern here.
Yeah.
This is the
But King brings up the new arming sword from Ronin Katana, which is this one right here, and how it is basically a carbon copy of the Albion Burgundian.
They even copied the riser design.
See, that's
If you look at the
not just the riser, also the exact hilt. You can see that it's got the same central ridge there. Everything is identical.
If you look at the central facet on that cross guard, you see there's like a diamond shape, right?
Yeah.
And that's exactly the same design by Peter Johnsson.
And that's
like
Williams too.
There's one thing that you got inspired by a model, and we're gonna emulate the vibe,
our version of it,
right?
Yeah.
But that's enough. Like James Elmsey brought that up. That he thinks that Albion Connect is
gonna get to that
on Messer,
right?
By Peter Johnsson, and then Bottle Arms basically rip it off, right? But what they did is that they have different parts.
The Quillins are different,
The Quillins and the power is different. The blade has more this taper.
Well, and at least it handles differently a little
But
bit, right?
we're gonna discuss this later, and this is
we'll get to the Kriegsmesser in a little bit. I want to talk about the Ronin.
We're gonna talk about that later, right? But this one is different because this is based on the Duke of Milan sword. Right. This is the Duke of Milan. Look at the guard, right? It's completely different. It's cylindrical. It has a different kind of taper. It doesn't have
the grip is completely different too.
Right.
So they can't.
The Quillins are different too.
They can't even make the argument that they're just making their version of this sword.
You cannot claim this is like Castillon Dordogne sword. This sword is different from Peter Johnsson design. But then Ronin Katanas is like a carbon copy. Maybe not perfectly done because they lack the capacity, but that's it. Like
but as close as they could get it.
As close as they could get it. And they got a hologram in the blade as well. They got everything. Look at the extremity of the quiver. Right.
So I was saying that.
Cut it out.
I brought this sword out because this is also their other new one, and this is the exact same blade as far as I can tell. They put the exact same blade on a hand-and-a-half hilt.
Yeah, can you
You want to give me one?
Sorry.
Get the cans.
No problem. Yeah, this is the same exact blade, and it looks. I don't have it down, but the Kingmaker and the Burgundian have the same blade.
Right.
Basically. Yeah. And this looks like a carbon copy of the Kingmaker. I can just look at it and say, yeah.
All right, because you have a Kingmaker, right?
I do have a Kingmaker, yes. I didn't get it down. I forgot to do that one. But yeah, this is very clearly designed as the blade is an absolute carbon copy of the Burgundian. This one shares the same crossguard as the arming sword, and then they put a longer grip and a different pommel on it. But yeah, this crossguard is just looking at it, comparing it to the picture of the Albion. It's identical. There's just no way you can say that this was not. It's just straight up copy. It's not inspired by. It's not influenced by. It is straight up carbon copied. And like you guys were saying, you can't say that it was their version of this because it's a wildly different crossguard.
Right.
Exactly.
Wildly different grip.
So different. And I saw on the SBG forum, I actually saw that you kind of got into a little bit of a conversation with some people on there, a little bit heated, because the argument, and again, I just kind of glanced at it. I was like, oh, well, I mean, they're going to make their version of that historical sword. Of course, it's going to look the same until you actually go look at the pictures. And then you're like, well, that argument completely falls apart because that is not the same sword. It's the same as the Albion.
Like a totally fair example of it being done correctly is like the Munich Town Guard, right? Almost everybody makes a version of the Munich Town Guard. And first of all, there are different Munich Town Guard swords you can base it off of. And secondly, they're all clearly based on the original, and there are huge differences between like LK Chen's version versus Albion's version, right?
Right.
And so that's the thing. Like that to me is it's done correctly. Yes, you're both inspired by the same sword. Have at it. But if LK Chen took Albion's sword and copied that to the dimension, that's where it gets super shady to me.
The only correction I'll make to you, John, there is Albion doesn't do a Munich Town Guard.
Doesn't do what?
I didn't catch you there.
The only correction I'll make is that Albion doesn't do a Munich Town Guard.
They don't.
Arms and Armor does.
Arms
Oh,
and
these
Armor.
are the-
Arms and Armor.
Okay, that's what I was thinking of. Yeah,
Yeah.
but the point stands.
Yeah, we totally get your point.
We got what you were throwing.
This is a completely different sword because the hilt is completely different. The only thing from this sword that they could claim was theirs or copied was the pommel and the fact that it's hollow ground. Although, man,
Right.
look how deeply hollow ground that thing is.
That looks crazy. And like,
cool sword though.
if you're gonna put the effort in to copy something, why not just copy the original?
right,
It's
Right.
right there.
well, they couldn't handle it. They couldn't
I
handle
have
it.
my
They couldn't
problem
make it
with
together.
Couldn't
Windlass.
get it.
Yeah.
The problem I have with Windlass, they could have just say, "Oh, okay, I learned something from building this sword. Right?
Yeah.
I got
Sure.
inspired. I make something of the similar spec
Exactly.
of a different, sets of fitting.
Yep.
And or even like same style but different specs, right? And then Mason or Royal Armories will be totally fine with it.
Yeah.
But no, they're gonna do a carbon copy of this.
Yeah.
To piss their partners off.
Right.
And I just don't understand why. Even you can move 1,000 of these, right? Which is like a crazy number. Albion don't even sell one model like 1,000.
Right.
Yeah.
Some of them are like
They don't even
500.
sell that much, right? But even if you can sell 1,000 of these, like, is it worth it to break the trust?
Well, okay. So then the question then, did they think no one would notice? Did they think nobody would talk about it? They think they'd get away with
We're
it?
gonna push this and see how far we can.
Or
go.
That's what it is. If they wanted to see how far they could go before somebody would
Yeah.
stand back.
right.
And if they would have got away with it,
Yep.
then you know what? They would
You
probably would
don't
have.
know where they're gonna
Yep.
do.
And they know they can't actually get sued for intellectual property
Right.
because it's not that. So they're like, yeah, let's take a shot, which just tells me everything I need to know about their integrity,
Yeah.
assuming that this is the case.
Right. Like if this turns out to be true,
Yeah.
dude, I don't know how much. Like I'm probably not going to buy a Windlass sword again.
Mm.
Like because I was already on the fence sometimes with like some of their models. Like I got the 1796 like cavalry saber, and mine came with a lot of quality control issues. I had to send it back, get another one, and it's fine. Still has some issues, but I'm like, you know what? That's probably going to be the best that I get. And the problem is they're not $200 swords anymore. That sword was almost $400. Like a little bit shy of that. And if I have to worry about all the things I have to worry about with Windlass, and now theoretically have to worry about like if they're a shady freaking company, then ethically I don't really want to buy stuff from them anymore. And I mean, and everybody can make that decision for themselves. I'm talking for me personally. I'm not down with that. So
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think what Windlass appears to be doing and what Roman Katana absolutely is doing in a different way is they're taking other people's design and saying, me too. I want to do that too. And people would never stand for that in books, for instance. Plagiarism is incredibly frowned upon. Everybody, I don't know of anybody who's ever defended plagiarism in fiction, for instance.
Right.
But there are defenders of this in the sword community. And I think that there's a mistaken impression that there's no design that goes into modern swords, that they are purely copying historic originals, and therefore there's no actual design and no real work put into it. And
There-
I disagree with that. Go ahead, Kane.
Albion has several lines of swords. One is a museum line, that's like a carbon copy
Yep.
of originals. And then the next generation line are Peter Johnson's own invention,
Mhm.
based on his like handling of museum
Right.
originals, but
Right.
then not a carbon copy of any of the museum original. It's like his own take.
something
in
that
terms
would
of-
have existed then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
geometry, right? Like
Mhm.
proportion and the handling. It's like Angus design, right? Like
Yeah.
it's inspired by originals, and you cannot take away a man's work. It's stealing.
Well, so then my question then is to the people that like Kyle, you were getting into on the SPG forum, or like I'm sure we're gonna get some comments on the stream maybe. Do those people not care as long as they get a cheap sword? Like, is that what it is? Like, you don't care about the work that people put into it? Let's see. Oh, Matthew Jensen, friend
Hey,
of the
you know
show.
that guy.
Yeah, I know him.
Hey.
Matthew,
Yeah.
hey, if you want to hop in, I can send you the link to this if you want to hop into the chat.
Do it, Matt.
Come to the dark.
Get
For
over
me-
here.
To answer this question, though, for me, I'm not okay with it. Period. I bought the Black Prince not expecting it to be an exact copy. I thought it was going to be close, but have differences, and I was very disappointed with the fact that it was not.
Right.
I bought that Ronin katana. I specifically did not buy the arming sword because I did not want to buy one that was an exact copy of the Burgundian. So for me, I would not personally. It could be a Peter Johnsson level sword, but if it was somebody else's design that he copied it from somebody, like say for instance, Peter Johnsson copies a Fable Blade sword, I wouldn't want it even if it was $200. I find that I don't like the moral implications there.
Mhm.
I agree with you 100%. And like the law of simultaneity, right? Like if everybody did that, then those companies that are making the excellent swords that are getting copied would not be able to stay in business, right? Because then why would anybody buy $1,000 sword when they can get it for $200?
Right.
And so yeah, like I'm not here for it, and it wouldn't matter how good it is. I wouldn't do it if I was aware of it beforehand. I mean, obviously I can only act on the information I have.
The good thing is that you cannot do that anymore because that Ronin katana arming sword has been discontinued.
Also?
You go to Kult of Athena, it's gone.
It's off Kult of Athena. It is not off other places. Kult of Athena, I think, chose to take it off. But I think if you still go to Ronin Katana's website, it's still available there. I think I'll double check.
Props to Kult of Athena then.
Yeah, that's it. Well,
they kind of learned their lesson there.
They're in the crosshairs too for that, so they want to make sure they come out on the right side of this. But Dials for Stupid here says intramarket copying extremely stupid because they copy everything except the actual quality and execution. The fact of the matter is, in this case, the quality and the execution are very comparable.
Because it's the same people.
Because it's literally made by the same people in the same factory with the same materials. So yeah, in general, you're probably right, but in this case, that's not the case.
Like he would be correct with the Ronin katana. That's not going to be the outfit.
Yeah, exactly.
But in this instance, that's the same sword.
Exactly.
But yeah, you can see here it's still available. It's just that Cult of Athena delisted it apparently, which, like you guys said, they probably they have experience with this whole issue, and
they're aware.
Hopefully, they decide to do the right thing.
Audience source, like they cannot,
they do.
Like it literally hurts them, right?
They profit from it.
And okay, so that does kind of naturally segue into the third sword to talk about, which I think we all have experience with, right? The Valor Arms Kriegsmesser. And this is the one that I think is the most tricky of the ones we're talking about because it is the most unique of the biggest difference in design. Since you guys have that right there,
that's the beast.
I will grab the one that they took heavy inspiration from, is the best way to put it. It is clearly designed to look like the Connect. I can never pronounce Connect right. It's, in my review of this, I said I think that they did just enough on the Valor Arms to not make it a direct copy. But as I said in that video too, I don't think my opinion actually matters as much as two other people's, and that's Peter Johnson's, who very much objected to it, and the owner of the Valor Arms brand, David of Cult of Athena. And both of them decided this was too close for comfort. Right. So there's acknowledgement there. That I have a lot of respect for Cult of Athena's owner, for David, for choosing to do that and say, you know what, maybe it's different, maybe it's not, but why risk that? Why leave that out there when I can just make a new one, design a new one? And
I actually have a story to tell there. Like if we just bring this over, like I go over this in my review, and you see that every aspect of this, like when we talk about intellectual property, because I interned for my uncle, who's an intellectual property lawyer. I mean, in the early 2000s, I would get to go over one case, in particular. I'm going to talk about that. But first, look at this messer. When you talk about intellectual property, you got to see how similar two things are in terms of the transformation or how deviant one like each component, an important noticeable component, is from the other. So The idea is that whether they can trick customer into thinking this is like the indistinguishable from the other one. If you look at this, right, the guard is different from the connection in some major ways, right? The twist, the risen quilong in termination, the central ridge on the cross guard, right? It's different from the Albion, and it's also tapered from the Albion connection. And the grip is different. You know, it's a sandwich with scale, now not a hidden 10. And that pommel is different, right? And the blade is different. It doesn't have the step on the spine. It has a greater degree of distal taper. So this is almost as thick as the base, but it's much thinner. So they feel very different. But let's just look at the vibe, okay? There's no denying that. Like if you ask single edge sword expert James Elmsley, he can tell you that the Albion Connect is not based on any original. So it's like an invention by Peter Johnsson.
Right.
Okay. So there's no denying that Bottle Arms, when they design this sword, and including the original for Cold Steel, right? They are trying to capitalize on the success of the Albion Connection.
Because that's a recognizable sword,
right? And the Albion Connection has been discontinued, so they're trying to take advantage of the vibe, right?
Sure.
It definitely has the same vibe,
right?
Even though they handle differently, if you look closely, they're not the same, and they took additional steps, right? Like it's not like, oh, we're doing this more sloppily, right? They're making this more difficult, right, to look differently. However, if you want to put it back, we can be more comfortable. I'm gonna tell you a story. Like here's my question: can you copyright, right, the vibe? Is vibe part of the intellectual property? So in early 2000, there was a famous lawsuit. So you guys all remember how popular Humvee is, right? And they have a commercial model after the Iraq War called the Hummer. So that's like a commercial, like a civilian model of the Humvee. It's super popular. Back then, it was a boxy feel, right? Like a very muscular feel. And then there's a like U.S. smaller maker in the U.S. called Aventi. Aventi make a vehicle pretty much like Humvee, but you look at the details, it's not really identical to them, right? Just like the Bottle Arms Kriegsmaster, every component has been transformed or is significantly distinguishable from Humvee. And then GM took Aventi to court. And here's a question: will the judge buy? Right? Like, is there even a case? Like, we're gonna go to like the jury hearing section. Like, there is a case that they stole your vibe, and maybe that's not even a thing. So we're gonna show this case out. So even during the processing, there's a lot of like debate in the legal community. But this is just like legal, right? Legal is not the same as ethics. Right. We gotta do something legal, but not ethical.
Right.
And so in the end, I guess GM's calculation, right? Their legal team is that there's no such a case. You cannot copyright vibe. You're gonna get thrown out, or probably you're gonna go to a trial. You're gonna fail. And so they reached a settlement before there was a court decision with Aventi, and Aventi gonna acknowledge they're capitalized on the vibe, and we're gonna do some more transformation. And GM allowed them to continue sell that vehicle. And the sad ending of the story is that Aventi went bankrupt 2 years later.
Right.
And then GM sold Humvee to a Chinese company. So both of them lost by the end.
Yeah.
Right, so I guess the question I pose to all the viewers here and to you guys is that, can you copyright a vibe? And then on top of like a legal perspective, if something is legal, can it still be very unethical?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So is it like a bad opinion, like a bad decision on Kult of Athena's part to try to capitalize on connection vibe to create this model? That's probably the why they discontinue this one.
Right. Well, and I personally, I can understand wanting to capitalize on the vibe of that sword. It's a popular sword. I get it. And I do think, they did change some things visually, but I think the biggest difference, I haven't handled the Connect, but Kyle, you can attest to this. If you closed your eyes and held them in each hand, you would know which sword is which, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
With the Black Prince, you can't do that.
It's really hard.
They didn't even try that much. And I'll give
Yeah.
props to Kult of Athena, because whether they thought the vibe thing was okay at first, and then they had the community say what we did, and then they had the experts like Peter Johnsson and Elmsley voice the fact that that wasn't okay, that that's still too close for comfort, then they discontinued it.
So I want to add in just a couple things. One, Kane, you said that the Connect is not it is a hidden tank. That's the Mark II. The Mark I Connect actually was the
Exposed
slabs.
tanks.
Yeah,
Right.
but the Quillons are.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to make that very small
Right.
correction.
Right.
And what I don't think we should even, or the question of legality never really even entered into the discussion, except by people who are trying to
Justified.
project a incorrect story. Because Peter Johnsson flat out said, no, he's not going to sue. That's ridiculous. Number one, Albion is a big name in the business, right? They are a tiny company. They do not have the time, the effort, the money to sue Kult of Athena. And I'm sure they don't have the appetite for that either.
Right.
In fact, Albion was never even involved in the question. It was purely Peter Johnsson. And as soon as, Kult of Athena was made aware of the objections of Peter Johnsson, because I reached out to them and said, hey, this is what Peter Johnsson has said. Do you want to have some kind of response for my review of the Valor Arms? And he basically completely made a culprit. He said the owner is still pretty new to the sword market. He's not deep in the sword community like all of us on stream are. So he had to relied on his sword designer, and he wasn't even aware of the Connect before I brought it up. And not particularly surprising if you're not in the sword community, you won't have seen Scalagrim's videos about it, because let's be honest, Scalagrim is the reason the Connect is such an iconic sword. But
also, Kyle, if you want to join, I'm sure Kyle would send you a link.
But the thing is, as soon as he realized that there was issues, and he looked at it, he said, we should not have done this.
Right.
So while I think they did enough transformation, to use what Kane said earlier, transformation is key when you're talking about inspired by and copied. And I think the Valor Arms did transform enough. Again, it's not really up to me or any of us.
What I would say though is I think that the size of the companies is relevant, because so I think in the case of the Messers, you can make an argument that even if there was a lawsuit to be made, you'd probably lose, just because there are enough substantial differences, particularly in the blade and the way the blade works and the handling. It's a very different handling sword than is the other one. But in the case of this Black Prince sword, I think that, let's say, for example, Royal Armory's line and Matt Easton, where let's say Disney owned them, I think Disney would have their attorneys burn Windlass to the ground.
Yeah, they would.
Like, Windlass would never make another sword, because whether or not there's enough intellectual property involved here to make it an actual lawsuit, there would be cease and desists, there would be injunctions, there would be all sorts of things. There would be investigations into the workings of the factories. Like, Disney would burn them to the ground.
It's
for what they
the
did.
intention matters, right?
Exactly.
You can see your intention is screwing over your partner, going around the contract. You seem to be smart.
Yeah.
Whereas this one is that we're gonna capitalize on the vibe of a discontinuous sword.
Exactly.
It's still problematic.
Yeah.
But that's not on the same level.
Right.
But a big company with a team of werewolf lawyers would make Windlass's life hell for what they've done here, if it turns out that that's actually what they've done.
Right.
But that's hell.
Justifiably.
I think bringing it back to the Black Prince, because it is the most egregious of all of them.
Yes, quite different conversation.
Right.
Different conversation between this and the Messers.
Because it really does feel, even more than the Ronin Katana Burgundian copy, because at least there, Ronin Katana is not a business partner.
Exactly.
Right.
Right? Yeah.
Windlass, I mean, again, we are speculating. We absolutely have to speculate here, and I am definitely caveating that because I don't want to get sued either. It really does seem like Windlass decided they had too many blades, too many hilt pieces, just too many. They made too much of that model, so they decided, well, they're not selling at $600. Let's sell them at $300 and see if we can make a profit.
Or they
And
just
through the Royal Armories and Matt Easton.
Or they just realize, hey, if we sell it at 300, that's all profit to us versus whatever their cut is from, you know, Royal Armories gets a chunk probably, you know what I mean? So yeah.
Right. And the initial investment's already made. You have all the trained technicians that can do it. You have all the connections made with your suppliers. You have all that initial upfront investment done. So this is like just a pure bad industry.
So you're not even having to pay money to do the research to like get the specs done. You just go,
And this goes to like another issue, whether you can just steal like your own one model based on a contract. You know, OTC did that, right? Like they did a batch with Kult of Athena on the Messer, and they didn't take it up to that offer. That they made some crease Messer and they didn't sell, and then they just go to Cold. You know what? I can sell this model to you, even though somebody else designed it. And we're gonna sell it under a different name, right? Like it was designed by Kult of Athena based on the vibe of the Albion connection.
That one's the egregious one. Like that one's definitely looks like the freaking connects. Like,
It looks like the connect made by somebody who doesn't understand the details.
Like Matthew Jensen said, copied the wrong homework.
Right.
And you know what? I feel like you can kind of trace all of this back to the way you used to have to buy swords before there was an internet. You know what I mean? Because it's just like the back of catalogs and you got to order and so nobody knew what anybody was doing, right? And so like you could get away with this for a long time. Well, you can't now.
And also, there wasn't a bunch of like nerds on the internet talking about it. They'd be like, "Hey, I don't like this thing. You're ripping it off."
That's
right?
What I'm saying. Yeah.
Here's like a viewer asking, he's ordering a Albion Brescia Spadona, and it's for multiple years, and not to mention like $2,500. And he's asking the opinion on that. I don't know. Maybe it's if someone do their own take of the Brescia Spadona, which is a museum example in Brescia.
Victor hates that sword
so much. It's not my favorite sword ever. So I don't want it. So I don't dream about. Yeah, go get it, Kyle. Thanks. I hate you so much.
So this is not based on. It's like a direct replica.
Right, I'm gonna need you to move it across the screen slowly.
Of example in Brescia.
Faster.
Yeah, sorry, Kate. Sorry, we're having too much fun. Go ahead.
Yeah, like some people love it, some people hate it. But you recognize the hill that's been
very recognized.
Let's say somebody try to come around and do an exact replica based on the museum example. Would that be set?
No,
because you're basing that on an original.
Right.
Somebody else can do that, just like the Munich.
That's what I was saying about the Hong Kong. Yeah, same thing.
Exactly. Feel free if you can
take your best shot.
Yeah, you can do it better.
Before we go that, Kyle did have Matthew Jensen's comment up there that said the Cold Steel Kriegsmesser was what did he say? It's like buying the Connect on Wish.
Exactly. Can we buy a Connect? No, we have a Connect at home.
So I want to go back to this. So Dial S for stupid. I can't give a ton of impressions on this because I barely use this, but I have done a little bit of cutting with it. I have a video somewhere on my channel, I don't remember when that was posted, of doing some cutting with it, and it's a heck of a cutter. I love this. This is one of my favorite sword designs. I think I'm right there with Vic on that. There's something just so.
Can you give us some insight? Because this is a ask. Like, what do you not like about this? Because the hilt is exactly the same as the Italian longsword, model arms, right?
No, I love it. That's like my favorite sword.
That's your favorite sword?
Yeah, no. I was being sarcastic. I hate Kyle because he got up to grab it
and waved it in his face.
Yeah. I'm just kidding, Kyle. I love you. No, I love it. That's why I have the Italian longsword, because it's the closest I can get to the Brescia Spadona right now.
Yeah. By the way, that's a prime example of a bastard sword. If you ask what a bastard sword means to medieval people, that blade is made in Sully, Germany. and the hilt is hilted in Russia. So
Mhm.
it's an Italian hilt on a German
There you
blade.
go.
So it's
Right.
a true Bassa sword. That's what Bassa sword means.
That makes
Original.
sense.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I love that sword. I want one really bad. Kyle, if there's one at Combat Con, don't tell me.
I'll make sure to message you directly.
Oh, I hate you so much. Do it.
It's so nice how we as sword friends like to help each
2.5
other out with
grand.
the finances.
2.5 grand.
Yeah, I know. Don't tell my girlfriend that.
I will happily aid you in your financially irresponsible decisions, Vic.
You know,
Yes.
that's what being a sword friend's all about, isn't it?
Exactly.
Exactly.
I just helped a friend buy about the Lockwood that came up on Kult of Athena recently.
Oh,
He bought that, and then he had to sell some swords to pay for it.
yeah. That was the purple one, right? That was like an
Yes.
interesting color. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a cool sword.
Yeah.
Here's Russell, sword friend Russell, asking. He thinks that Kult of Athena needs Albion more than Albion needs them, right? Because
False.
yeah, so I think that Kult of Athena just want to do the right thing by Albion because
Right.
they still make profit of Albion. So there's no like if you want to maintain your profile as a retailer,
Right.
premium retailer, you need Albion, Arms Armor, and Angus Trim to have like a veneer of being like a respectable.
So that's the thing. So I'm going to say if Albion suddenly pulled all their swords from Cult of Athena, they're not going out of business. However, if they want to maintain the respect of the community, then yes, doing what they did with the mess, like that went a long way for, I'm going to assume, all of us, that how he did that. By the way, if you guys haven't seen Kyle's review of the Battlegrounds Kriegsmesser that he did in collab with Kane Shen, watch that because that was some investigative journalism. The way you put up
these guys did it.
Yeah, the way we did a review too, but like
Okay.
Kyle, the way he put up the screenshots of the conversation with Elmsley and Johnson and all that, like that was some good shit, and like that was a really informative video to like talk about all of this.
We were literally just talking about that the other day, how much respect we had for the way you did that.
Yeah.
You did such a good job, Kyle. Like you were so impartial. You presented evidence on both sides. Really, really, really well done.
I appreciate that. That was a tricky one to review.
Oh, I could imagine. That was
And
probably
you
good.
treated it with like the delicacy that
Yes.
it required because there were a lot of landmines you could have stepped on.
Yep.
And you did a really, really good job getting the information out and also being decorous as you did it. I was very impressed with that.
Yeah, that was a fun video.
Yeah, definitely.
For sure. And here's a sword friend Russell.
Oh!
Look who's telling you.
What happened?
Well, there goes the property value.
Jesus Christ, to let anybody on this.
What?
Aw. Hey, you guys got any change? I'm jonesing for a sword, guys.
So
I'm gonna grab a beer. Yeah, just for you.
I'll get this.
You get this.
I can't imagine anybody
Oh, yeah, you know,
on my channel is not aware of Matthew Jensen.
Yeah.
But Matt, do you want to introduce yourself just in case?
in case nobody knows him.
Yeah, nobody really knows me. Hi, I'm Matthew Jensen. I babble about swords on the internet. And if you've had the pleasure or displeasure of coming across the content that I make, then you are in for 45 minutes of reiteration about the same thing over and over and over again. Kyle will probably link my details, or maybe he won't. I don't know. But I have a channel,
Absolutely.
and it's really hard to find because it's my name, exactly as it's spelled down there, Matthew Jensen.
His email address is his social security number.
Yep, I have boomer logic.
I'm really happy I'm happy you jumped on because like now I don't feel so bad about jumping onto your live stream the last time when it was all you guys. So
Hey, how's it? Hey, no, sword friends more the merrier as far as I'm concerned. This is your
Strongly
party,
agree.
so I appreciate getting invited, but yeah, I'm never weirded out by it.
So Matt, I don't know how much of the conversation you caught about sword IP and all that, but what are your thoughts?
Well, I only caught a bit of the conversation, and it's nuanced and complicated, and like let me add a layer, right? So hypothetically, there's a US based company that owns the IP, and they are strictly due to legal contracts signed in the 70s, the only ones legally allowed to reproduce anything in the museum that's a sword. And then somebody that maybe you also love, whose name rhymes with Schmieder Schmonson, also like reproduce something from it, right? No, I'm not saying that this necessarily happened, right? But there is a company that like owns the ability to reproduce anything from the Wallace collection, and a lot of stuff has been reproduced from the Wallace collection that wasn't made by this company, despite having the exclusive legal rights to do so. So like what about that, right? I don't know. Like it gets really muddy very quickly when it comes to ethics and what's okay and who wronged who. So, I think the best you can hope for is that people respond amicably and don't try to just kick each other in the nuts. But it gets really muddy really quickly in terms of like what's okay to copy. And so that you've got some examples where like the Connext is a great one. I don't know, like maybe there's a historic example that could be found that's exactly like that. If there's not now, maybe there will be, because like the intent is to kind of build something plausible, if not an exact copy of a museum. If all of a sudden an original is found and it's wasn't intentionally, but is now like a copy of an original piece, can somebody copy the original piece and like no harm, no foul? Also, like in Suba, for example, it's a different conversation. And I know I'm not answering your question. I'm just giving you different questions, but it just shows like how anytime you say like, don't do that, it all of a sudden limits, creative potential, revenue potential. And it'd be really easy for somebody to like box things in and say, I'm the one who makes an arming sword. You're all making, like you could really, the line becomes really fuzzy and a matter of interpretation. So, I don't inherently have a problem with it unless I do, but like,
don't be too specific.
Yeah, there are some things that seem really on the nose as copies. The LK Chen work for me personally, right? I didn't see it as a copy of the Connext, but I think that's because in my mind, if I think of Kriegsmesser, I think of that one because it's the first one that I saw. And I know that James Elmsley and Peter have done like all of this research, and they're like, there's a world of work out there. Like, why would you pick the same one that there's so many options here. Like, why would you do the same one? And I think that's just because like when you think of arming sword, you think of something from Sword in the Stone. So there are always these diamond cross section, single-handed wheel pommel, and you can, dress that cat up however you want, but like it's still like there's this general idea of an arming sword, and everyone makes 12 of them. And I think that's just how Kriegsmessers worked. When people were trying to replicate them, I think like everybody's mind, maybe because of Peter and Albion, were like that's what that sword is. They didn't know that there's all the
Albion Connect is the antique.
Yeah, right.
That's
like
the source material.
Yeah.
It's discontinued. It's antique.
Yeah, that's I suppose the other part is you'd have to prove damages, and if the sword isn't for sale.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And then
Peter Johnsson said that it diminished the value of the Connection, like existing Connection.
Mm-hmm.
See, I don't think so. I think that the reputation that sword had, I don't think that would be the case.
I don't think it so much devalued it, but it was definitely copying. There was at least some degree of copying of homework there.
Yeah.
But
no
I do
doubt.
think
I'm just saying from like if I were counsel on the other side there, I would show used examples selling for more than original retail, and I would say like the value continues to go up. So what damages? How has it diminished the value?
Well, and Peter Johnsson again flat out said he had no interest in anything legal.
Right.
It's more we're going down a long hypothetical trail, and so in this case, it sounds like it's great that people just didn't try to kick each other in the nuts, and they were like, "Hey, you got a point. I don't want any kind of dickishness or bad blood here. Let's like I didn't know there were other options. Let's find something with spikes and cool stuff on it," which I hope they do, because there's so many awesome looking messers that have way cooler shapes. Anyway, I in some cases it's not so bad. In other cases it is. But people get really mean about it. There was a case a while ago around a Suba. There was a guy named Roman Urban, and Ford Hallam is also a guy who is like really well known for making Japanese fittings, like Suba in particular. He's kind of the guy. And Roman had taken some classes from him, and there was this one example that he made, and Roman made another one of them. But like the original was kind of a Ford had made one that was kind of a rework of an original, and Roman made one that was kind of a rework of an original, and nobody exactly copied it, but there was a bunch of bad blood because like the same Japanese letters were on the same place on the crossguard, and it was like, no, that's too much of a copy. And he's like, it's kind of a long sentence. There's only one place to put it. If I'm gonna like if you had, if you wanted to write penis on a crossguard, right? There's only so many ways that you could do it depending on the crossguard, right? Like it kind of have to go across, like you wouldn't write it vertically. And if you were the first one to put, a mushroom stamp on a crossguard and somebody else did it and did it in the same place, you'd be like, well, there's only if you want to draw a dick on a crossguard, there's only so many ways to do it,
That is the most elegant thing I've ever heard.
I don't know why I went on that tangent, but I think the point is that like even if artists are kind of playing fair and they're all doing their own unique work, it still creates like a lot of animosity around any kind of copying. So it's best to steer clear would certainly be the advice I'd give. At the same time, I don't always have a problem with
anybody for copying your vibe, but it's just less cool because you're not the OG anymore, right? Whatever the person come along, they are. I mean, sometimes they can overshine you in reputation. Like people will know him more for doing that than you do. Right? And it's a bit of a problem, but like there's no way, like in the realm of ethics or legality, that you're gonna prevent other from doing that.
Right.
It's not possible. Right? You can only like you can say, oh, you guys are less cool because I did that before it was cool.
Right.
Right.
Well, and I think, we keep going back and forth between what the actual legality is and what the ethics are. And I feel like a thing we all need to like acknowledge again is that while legally maybe it's okay, technically, ethically is the bigger question that I think we're all addressing on this stream. Like, is that okay?
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And, Matt, you made a great point about the messers, but like when it comes to the Black Prince, I'm curious what your take is on that, because that is literally the same sword.
Quite literally.
He's not focusing. Is the Black Prince is supposed to be a historical sword though, right? Like,
correct.
The Black Prince is a historical sword, but it's different from the Royal Armories.
When we're saying Black Prince, we mean this sword here.
They name it the Black Prince.
Right.
The original Black Prince is different.
Which makes it less historically accurate because it's not based on
this one is not
It's
the
almost
Black
like a red
Prince.
herring.
They just
calling it the Black Prince is almost a
you
red
can
herring.
I got
call it
you.
Black Prince, but it's like
You got too many people talking here.
If I understand correctly, Windlass did like a Royal Armories thing, and then they just like made a color. They reskinned it and sold it for cheaper, right?
Wait a minute. Generous. Reskinning is a generous term, I would say.
Yeah.
They didn't even do that much. They threw some powder coat on it, and that's about it.
Yeah.
While still selling the original.
Yeah, that is problematic. Not like, yeah, to me that sounds like straight up dick move. I would certainly take issue with it, particularly if I was Matt Easton and had like done some sort of development and working on like creating it. Is that their work is also quite a bit different than the like Arms and Armor makes the Black Prince. Who else? I want to say I've seen a few
Legacy
other.
Arms makes a Black Prince. Dark Sword Armory makes a Black Prince. But those are all radically different swords.
They are all just do whatever they want.
Right.
They don't look at the original.
And they call it the Black Prince.
But Arms Armor comes a little bit close because they had a chance to handle the original.
Mm-hmm.
But even so, right, their blades are different. Like they got some of the measurements. And we do know that the original Black Prince has a wider blade than the Royal Armories, the 15th century type 15A sword. Right? And it's just a little bit different in the subtlety. So it just comes back to what I talked about earlier. If you want to like make a Black Prince sword, that's totally fine, right? I'm not saying actually do that. Yeah, right? I implore Windlass to do that. Right. You take what you learn from this experience.
Sure. Yeah.
And I bet you Matt Easton and Royal Armories will be happy. Yeah. They'll be okay. At the very least, you say, we're going to make a long sword based on that because we know the kind of, the sickness. It has to be very sick. the kind of distal taper there is, the kind of profile there is. It's a huge pummel. We're gonna make something similar to that, but not a carbon copy, right? You cannot do that.
JC Owens, that is inconceivable.
I think a part of it, like, there's my impression of it, right? Because like I like Matt Easton and I like the Royal Armories, and I want them to like be successful and have their endeavors be profitable things that continue and that we get to see more of.
And it's good for the market.
On the back end side of things, though, like I don't know what was signed, so there may well be some sort of clause in the contract that in the event that there's not enough of them sold, that the tooling can be repurposed for, you know, derivative works or something like that. And if they have some clause in about the tooling, then the assumption would be that it's going to basically look like the same thing, right? And I it's not fun, but like hypothetically, when we're talking about swords and we were talking about coffee pots, right? There's a coffee pot that you like, and this company goes and works with this, you know, other company.
I'm going to cut you off for 1 second. Just pause you for 1 second. That hypothetical can pretty much be discounted by the fact that the Black Prince sword, quote unquote, is now off their website
after 1 month.
After
they
1 month,
discontinued
they took it off. So it's not that there was okay, and then that's what we thought too. We're like, either they made a deal of whatever structure, and that's fine. In which case, there's no harm, no foul. Or this is just what it looks like. And the fact that it's been yoinked tells us it's got to be this what it looks like.
I don't know that it tells you that. Like in the event that they had excess quantity and they didn't want to sell the exact same thing. I'm just saying like the real problem would be like if somebody at the Royal Armories or Matt Easton says like, hey, I've been done dirty here. And in that case, then I have a problem with it. But if all parties signed a contract and this was a potential outcome of that contract, then, you know, woohoo, cheap swords. So
my concern is I don't think either Matt Easton or Royal Armories would take the unprofessional approach of calling them out. I think they would just stop working with them.
Because they are still in a partnership right now. They're developing
Literally,
a second batch.
making a second batch
6 swords. Like now, if you speak Cal, it'll be turning on your partner. That'll be bad form.
Right.
So this is additional, like extra dick move. Like you're turning on your partner, you know, actual like an active like relationship.
Right. It's not like it's ended and now you're gonna talk some shit. It's like you're
put them on the spot to test them.
Right.
It's not acceptable. Stop doing that. Right.
I just don't. I'd want confirmation that it is. Sometimes in like when you're talking about the passion of swords as an individual object, there's one thing, but there's this whole like business behind them that involves supply chain and contracts and manufacturing and training and people and blah blah blah. There could be a very plausible and reasonable explanation that everyone is happy with, or it could be exactly what it looks like, you know, just straight up fuckery. But I'm not. You know, I before I go out and say like, hey, Windlass, you know, eat shit. I just like to be very, very sure that that's the kind of thing. Like, okay, you know that you have a strong partnership with this person, and you're selling swords, and they're helping you with like training and development, and like kind of changing the perception of your brand from like, hey, if you want a sword thing, and it like you want to be able to kind of use it, and nobody watched that video where it broke at the hilt that Matt made. Yeah, like, hey, have your $200 fun. But now you sell $800 things, and there's all sorts of people that seem kind of happy with you. You know, like all of a sudden, your brand kind of got elevated a little bit, and then you're going to take the guy that did this and do him dirty. Like that's low. But I'm just saying. You know, I was about to go on a tangent with a coffee pot, so I'm glad you stopped me. But there are. In terms of manufacturing, there are logical reasons where they might want to use the components. They might have used the wrong metal. It could be some. I don't know. I'm just saying there may be an explanation for it. And if Windlass or if Matt and the Royal Armories and the you know potentially affected parties are not at all fazed by it and knew about it, or you know are not don't find it to be a problem, then I don't know why I would. At the same time, if that's not the case. They're like, yeah, I have no comment. Then I'd be like, fuck you, Windlass.
My suspicion is we will find out over the next year or two.
Good job.
If they keep on doing the Royal Armories collection, I assume they're going to go through with the next wave because there's been a ton of work done on it. But if there's not a third wave, that at least is informative. It's not for sure, but I don't think we're ever going to get the full story because, like I said, I think Matt Easton and the Royal Armories are way too professional to dive
They're
into.
big boys, and they're gonna deal with it, right?
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
However,
would you though? Like, I mean, I guess they may not call them out directly, but if they're like, all of a sudden, the new line of Royal Armories is being produced by LK Chen.
That's right. Yeah.
That would be the thing.
Dude, yeah, if that just part of it stops,
Hey,
well,
Matt,
there's the sign.
Matt Easton, if you're watching, do that. Do
We'll
that.
send,
By the way,
we'll
okay,
send
yeah.
you a link.
Seriously.
Join the chat.
Yeah, right. We can send you his email. We have it.
And I've been posting a few interesting comments. I don't know if anybody has been seeing them.
We can circle back to some of them if you want.
Yeah.
This one I thought was actually really interesting. Matthew, you said about somebody having exclusive legal rights to reproduce all the swords in the Wallace collection. And Baltimore Knife and Sword brought up a really interesting point, in my point, that's kind of odd for a museum to claim basically that nobody else can reproduce a sword that they had nothing to do with creating themselves.
I mean, arguably, we do that all the time with different things, though, right? So it's just because like Elvis Presley is dead, and like he made all of his music, there are people now alive that still own the rights to reproduce that, and nobody else can do that. Though you can argue that it's been licensed that entire time, as opposed to these swords, which were just in the ground.
You get into like also this was how old is the? I mean,
Exactly.
we're veering too
Yeah.
much into legality again here.
Yep.
There's a legal
what
amount
what
of
I would say
time.
from the about it, not a lawyer, so I'm more or less using that as an example of ethics, right? If you had a problem
That's what I meant.
with Matt Easton making a thing and then Windlass doing another thing, like, would you have a problem if a U.S. based maker that you respected had a contract to do this and then somebody did something else with it? Is it kind of the same thing? And so that was more the spirit that I was looking at. Now, in terms of like, if the Royal Armories had, presumably they have a contract with Windlass where Windlass is getting to like reproduce the items at Royal Armories and like other people can't do it. I don't know that means that if, for example, Baltimore Knife and Sword decided to come out with a line of similar items that were manufactured at the Royal Armories, I don't know if that would be IP theft. I don't know if they own the IP for the items in their specific collection, or if it would just be
pretty
around the, like, you couldn't brand it Royal Armories.
You need your own man in there to examine, right? Provide the specs. You can't just say, "Oh, we're gonna make this right now, and we're gonna copy out your."
Assuming you could get over that hurdle, right? I don't know the legality around reproducing and then selling a copy of a piece at a museum, if the museum owns that intellectual property, or if they don't. Yeah. Could they, if you own a sword that somebody else made, some historical museum piece that's interesting and somewhat unique, and somebody starts selling copies of it, is that okay? Does the museum? I don't know.
They can terminate their partnership with you.
That's pretty telling. Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to answer the question from the Baltimore Knife and Sword side of things. Like, if hypothetically Baltimore Knife and Sword wanted to reproduce one of the pieces from Windlass, from the Royal Armories line or something, and I think Matt Easton did some maybe intellectual property when it came to the handles, because he said he had to design those himself because they were gone. But if you copied the blade and made some other kind of handle, would Royal Armories have grounds to sue you? I don't honestly know the question. I don't know the answer.
No,
but I do know how I'd feel about it, and I'd be like, Baltimore Knife and Sword, what the hell? Why are you making copies?
They're probably going to boycott it by the community, right?
That's
very interesting.
I don't think it has.
Your hypotheticals are not hypothetical enough, Matt. You need to be
right. You gotta invent like a new company. Don't use us. Like, we're not gonna do that.
They're basically like
classical company.
They're like, bruh.
No, it's interesting though. Like, I've seen some really unique. I'm sure all of us have seen like really unique museum pieces that aren't currently being recreated.
Sure.
I can't remember exactly what it was. There was one that looked really nifty, and it was one of the inspirational pieces for the Perna Denal Type 18C blades, and I can't remember what it was, or the name of it, but What was that?
Scottish, like a Scottish piece with a Scottish hilt.
Yeah. There was something nifty cool about it that was just a little different. And I don't know, does the museum own, like, if somebody decides to reproduce that, nobody's currently making it, you know, Baltimore Knife and Sword, if you decide to make a copy of it, does the museum have grounds to sue you? The original owner is dead.
Definitely not.
There's like 100-year copy on
90% of the makers, right?
Yeah.
You can't say, oh, you have this element on one of the original in your collection, and somebody gonna come along to make one off that piece, whether it's accurate or not. Like you don't get to sue them. Like it's
Although, like, here's an interesting question, and again, this is more legal than ethical, but like the Harriet Dean sword, for example, that's is that name trademarked? And if so, who trademarked it? And if it's trademarked, right, it could be I could trademark it tomorrow, though. I could go tomorrow and be like, you know,
I don't think you can. Right?
If I'm the Philadelphia Museum and I own the sword and then I trademark,
but then you didn't make it. It's only in your collection.
True,
it's
but
like if you have
just that term. So then if you want,
if you have a Monet piece, you don't get to trademark the painting. It's an artifact from the past. It's created by somebody else. They own that intellectual property.
Right, but then I'm just saying the name.
They are deceased.
Right, I'm saying the name though, because
you might
that made the sword didn't call it the Harriet Dean sword. It was just
but there's a lot of non-lawyers here speculating on how it works. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. It was more I used that example maybe with a little bit more legal vocal thunder than I should have. So I don't actually know the answer to it, but I could see how it would make me frustrated, you know. If a museum is trying to keep the doors open and like keep the collection growing, and one of the ways they do that is by offering reproductions of the items in their collections, then I would find it distasteful to have another maker also making copies for profit, when I would see that as kind of like the wheelhouse of that museum if they're in that business.
I didn't get to finish my point though, so I actually want to finish it.
Oh, sorry.
So, like, again, the Harriet Dean sword is a name, just like Ford Mustang is a name, right? They didn't invent Mustangs. They didn't invent the horse. Lots of people use that term. But if Toyota wanted to make a Mustang, that would be a problem, probably. If they wanted to make a similar car called a Mustang,
you need a product first to trademark for that, right? Like it has to, like I trademark my product, you need a product for sale. Right. If you have a product for sale, you can trademark for that, but you don't even need to own that original piece. Like if you say, I'm going to create a Harriet Dean sword, I'm going to trademark for that, and you specify the traits, the characteristics for that, so people cannot use that anymore. Like they can't even make a different sword of that.
I'm talking about this now.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
I know you can't trademark these nuts. I know that one.
I think we should get off the topic of trademarking because it's completely different than copyright.
I just trademark my product, so
I actually wanted to go back to something you said about the Kriegsmesser, Matt, in that, and something that I was thinking is the issue, in my opinion, came in because not only was the hilt very heavily inspired, but the blade as well. I wanted to just share this, a variety of different Messer or Falchion blade shapes. The Connect is basically a 4B from what I can see. If Valor Arms had chosen any of these other ones, 3E4, 4C, 4D, etc., I'm betting Peter Johnsson would not have complained in the slightest. It was the fact that it was the exact same blade type and a hilt that was designed to evoke the overall look of the Connect. Yeah. And again, I still think they did enough transformation personally, but there's plenty of other examples that you could definitely do to make that a more unique sword with not a lot of work, honestly. There's not a huge difference between a 4 and a 4B. You have this little upward step, for instance, or any number of things could have been done.
Yeah. I don't know if 4B is like the most cost effective to make, but yeah, there's a lot of different kinds, and you can still scratch the same itch.
And we'll see whether they come up with new models. Yeah. Because they discontinue the old one. If they come up with new models based on experts' input, then we know,
Right.
right?
Like
Yeah.
Elmsley, I know, like said he would work with them. Did they ever get confirmation that he was doing that?
I introduced Elmsley to the owner of Cult of Athena, and last I heard they were working,
They're doing their own things.
doing on it. I don't
It's
know where that is, but that should be an awesome sword. My hunch
voted
is
for
it's going to be
3E.
more expensive.
Everybody signed the non-disclosure agreement, so we're just gonna have to wait. Right?
Mm.
And let's talk about the fact that Alien Tude is moving the entire sword market forward by introducing
Seriously?
like literally like professional makers with the people that classify these swords. And so we're gonna get an entire line of swords now, thanks to
Yeah,
Alien Tude.
thank you.
Right.
We just breezed right by that.
Let's talk about that for a second.
So I think that's probably more than enough about IP.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's speculation.
got a short friend Russell that he wants us to talk about the grip lengths on long swords, hand and a half swords, and a great sword of war. So not really two-handed sword, but like
Mhm.
more of those hand and a half, but like shorter two-handed swords. Why the modern ones are longer,
Mhm.
right? Why the originals, if you look at the originals in the museums or private collections, they are a little bit shorter. Yeah. and while-
Interestingly, we just got a primer on this by Gus Trim this
Yeah.
very day today, as we were down there cutting, and he showed us one of his. Which one did he show? It was the Type 18, I think.
You talking about the blue one? No, it was the 12. The
It was the
12.
twelve.
we got
Yeah.
we got
a bunch.
like
Ton of
over a
swords.
dozen
Yeah.
swords.
We hung out with our boy G Trizzle. It was great.
Yeah, some competition cutting
Friend of the show.
champions, right?
Sorry,
Like,
John.
And so one of the swords he showed us, I think it was the Type 12, Type 12A. Was it 12A?
Mhm.
Yeah. And it had a really, really long handle. Like it was a long sword. It died in the wool long sword, but it had a handle that's probably
10
not
inches?
10 inches,
maybe?
9 and a
Yeah.
half,
Like
10
longer
inches.
than most, probably.
Yeah, long enough that there was a substantial space between my hands when I put them
Right.
fully on the handle. And I was like, wow, you can really get a lot of torque on this.
Right.
Just exactly like that length.
Yeah.
Very similar to that LE2. And so literally, I was like, you can get a lot of heft on that. And he's like, yeah, but body mechanics wise, if you bring your hands together, it's always better. It's faster, it's better for cutting, it's everything.
It's stabler.
It's more
and
stable, yeah.
You're gonna stabilize the sword, but
Yeah.
also that your offhand is gonna move less
Exactly, yeah.
less
Right.
distance.
Yeah, so you're faster.
And but like if you want to do a snap cut,
Yeah.
with more leverage, it's gonna easier, right? Like
Yeah.
you just throw it out, cast it out.
Yeah.
It's that easy, right?
Totally.
Because your offhand doesn't really need to move that
Yeah.
far.
Exactly.
But
When-
like a longer distance, with a chamber back, the full range of motion,
Mhm.
having two hands a little bit closer,
Mhm.
right? Even like bunched together, and we don't like that, right? Because you rotate it, the palm will collide with your thumb, and it's not a pleasant sensation. But if you do that, it locks the sword in your hand. It's
Mhm.
more stabilized.
Yeah.
It goes to the target like more just with more
So-
authority.
Sure.
So I wanted to say what my thoughts were on that. I think a lot of it stems from feathers. You see a lot of feathers with very long hilts, and when you're watching people who train with feathers and actually spar and fight, there's not a lot of big motions. They're keeping the sword out in front of them, so they're not doing like what Kane was just explaining. The full cut. They're doing quick cuts. When you have that extra leverage, the tip accelerates quicker.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So when you've got that out in front, you can accelerate the tip out to the cut quicker. And I think a lot of makers are aiming for that same market of people who have experience with feathers, and then so that's what they like to use. That's the style they like to use. So then people make sharp swords that will handle like feathers.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
I think Masu has a lot of input because he's like a Japanese sword guy with very long grip.
Right.
I can obviously talk for a long time about anything. So the only way that I've found, like if your hands are really close together, is to kind of get your palms lined up and kind of twisted it in, locked in, and tuck your elbows in a little bit. And then I find that I don't exactly like cutting like that, but I do find that the structure is good. and that cuts perform well, and I don't feel like I'm out of control with the sword, or it doesn't like the pommels and stuff don't tend to bite me as often when I do that on short-handed grips as well. Because what I'll often run into is if I hold it like I suppose feels natural, then when I go to cut things, if I'm cutting harder or medium targets, the wheel pommel starts to irritate me, as which is common. I'm not wheel pommels tend to disagree with my hands often. I don't mind necessarily just grabbing onto one and throwing a cut out there, but if I kind of twist my palms over the back of the sword and swing like that and try to align it a little differently, then shorter grips can be okay. But I don't like that grip, and I don't oddly on like a Japanese sword, I prefer what would normally be a smaller grip, which is like a 10.5 inch grip. It's not egregiously small historically, but when you start talking about it on like a 31-inch sword, which is quite a bit longer than, at least a lot of the a lot of Japanese swords, it would be considered a smaller handle. But I don't have like anything to prevent me from holding it all the way down at the bottom. So yeah, I don't generally like a short grip on a European style sword, and I also don't like it to be stopped by a wheel pommel. I like to. I don't know if that answers your question. I'm trying not to prattle on. And
yeah, here's a question for you. When you have a longer blade, like let's say 36-inch blade, or 30 like maybe 42-inch blade, do you prefer a longer handle, like proportional to the blade?
That depends. So like if I'm talking about almost like a clearly only two-handed sword, right? Then just for the sake of leverage, having like a 6-inch grip on a 50-inch blade and having a sword that weighs 5.5 pounds would be kind of rough to move around. So just so that you can manipulate it, I guess in a way, yes. But generally, I prefer the grip be smaller than longer. So I think my preference would generally tend to go towards the smaller. The smallest it can be to still manipulate the weapon effectively. And so if I think of like Miao Dao or something like that, like that's a much longer grip, but it's also a very different weapon. And if I move on a Miao Dao weapon I'm not familiar with, like I feel like I use the whole grip because I travel around it differently, and the weapon feels really effective if I choke up on it, and I can use it like a short spear almost, or like a sword. And if I want it to become like a glaive, then I can go towards the back end of the weapon, and all of a sudden I have a big sword on a little stick. But the Maximilian or the Tyroline from Albion, the grips I think are about as big as I'd want them to be on swords like that. Like I feel like I have enough to move it around, and it's not too big. If it was as big as some of the larger grips I've seen on Zweihanders, then I don't know, they just don't.
So we
silly.
Collaborated on Maximilian. So you seem to not a fan of the handling of the Maximilian, and you prefer Tyrolean a little bit more, because I imagine there's a more gripping space, right? And because of the type of pommel, it's more like a doorknob. They can choke down a little bit, so there's more leverage. So it seems that the grip length does seem to, it factors in, right? Like in terms of handling. Do you think that sword, if it will benefit more from having a longer grip, or you just think that the blade needs more profile taper and distal taper in terms of mass distribution?
It starts getting into the weeds a little bit, but I think it was summed up really well by somebody in the comment section that said, I was trying to use the Maximilian like a sword, like any sword I would move around, and it's not. The grip isn't long enough for me to use it like a polearm or any other kind of weapon that I'm vaguely familiar with, and so I said it didn't feel like an extension of my arm. It felt unnatural. And people that seem to have a lot more experience moving those around were like, yeah, dummy, it's not an extension of your arm. Like it's a dancing partner. And so
your body needs to move along with that sword.
Sure.
Yeah. And that's
You
just
think
not,
it's
not something I do. I'm not experienced with it, so naturally it's uncomfortable and feels kind of weird. When I pick it up, it feels like a weapon. Like you need to train with this, right? So if it's not something that I'd want to use in any circumstance, like without having a lot of time to prepare myself to use it, because I couldn't pick it up and be as effective as I could with something. Like I'd rather have a much smaller sword and somebody else untrained gets that big son of a bitch, because I think I could be a lot more effective with a tool I'm more familiar with. Even if it was a long sword and it's not like something I practice with all the time, just the general dimensions are something that I feel a lot more comfortable guarding with and getting out of the way with, and putting the blade where I want without leaving myself exposed. And I didn't feel like I could do that effectively with honestly either one of them, the Maximilian or the Tyroline. But that's a me problem, absolutely. And the Tyroline, I think if I sent it to Matthew Cross to put a less chungusy grip on it, it would be even better, because it does have like almost like a grip breaker. Like it's like a challenge to kind of hang on to. Like it's intentionally made big so that you can't hold it well. But the doorknob at the base also like really makes things comfortable to move around. So when I was using the Maximilian, if I held onto the pommel, it didn't or brought my hand anywhere near it, it was, grippy. It wasn't problematic, and it was very pretty. But the doorknob lets me like basically keep my hand there, and it's cylindrical, so I can move it around. And if I not that I did any effective dancing, but if I was able to pull off any move that was not laughable and not lap my own leg off, basically the hardware furniture on there, the doorknob was a more comfortable way of going about it.
So it locks your hand in, offhand in, without slipping, without the risk of slipping off, right?
Yeah, I don't feel like my hand's going to come off of it. And it didn't feel like it was going to come off of it with the Maximilian. But if I wanted to turn, the kind of lobes on the Maximilian like grab your hand, right? So I can feel it, and it's not super comfortable. But I mean, I use a doorknob pretty frequently. I'm familiar with the concept of doorknob. They turn in my hand pretty well. And so in that case, if I was trying to like move it around my head, and the pommel is, on my left hand, like just kind of turning in the space on the palm of my hand, it didn't feel like it was catching, or that I was, I felt like I was in pretty good control of that area of the sword. But I say it's in the weeds because like, like I'm familiar with driving a car, and all of a sudden I got put behind a forklift, and I'm like, it feels really unfamiliar, and I feel like I'm going to stab something I shouldn't.
Yeah.
And so, like you're asking about like, how did the forklift handle? And I'm like, well, it fucking sucked. I was ass. I didn't feel in control. I felt like there was very little forking or lifting happening. I felt, I didn't know what I was doing, but the leather seats, they were cushy, like that's kind of what I think I added the conversation.
So here's my question to you. Have you
hang on.
Yeah.
There's been a discussion in the comments about what type of pommel is right. And I wanted to, Matt, I don't think you were here for early on when I was talking about the Black Prince. I know your distaste for wheel pommels, and I just want to say there is a technique where if your hands are just the right size, you can rest the pinky right against the center boss, and it locks your hand in there, and you can actually use that pinky to help accelerate the sword better. It requires just the right sword. This is the only one that I've felt that on. It's a really cool feeling when you can actually do it. So if you handle tons of swords. So if you ever get a chance, see if you can find
think
one.
Finding a wheel pommel that suits me is like finding kombucha that I like the taste of, like it's just
the wheel pommel on this one, it's almost like a sense stopper pommel.
This is the apotheosis of wheel pommels.
Right.
Like, literally, this is like for beating people on the head with when you like literally.
The transition.
It's the biggest wheel pommel ever in life.
Transition to the central hub. You see how concave it is?
Yeah.
It's almost like it's designed for your offhand to rest on.
Yeah.
It really
There's
does.
no discomfort at all.
It's
Like,
quite
when
a thing.
when you rotate it,
Right.
it's so natural. Like it's
like a
almost
little
designed
mace.
for that.
It is totally a mace, yeah. Like murder stroke all day.
Kane, what were you going to say?
What's that?
What were you?
Oh, so I'm just saying that can I have the pummel for a second? Can I get the pummel off?
That's
Like it's
Get
if
the
you
ball.
rotate
Oh,
this-
phrasing. We're
Right.
not doing that
If you
anymore.
look at the way
You're not even doing
the concave grind, right? Like between the central hub to the like edge of the pummel, it's almost like it's just made for your offhand.
Pinky
The-
just sit there.
The pinky just sit there
Yeah.
and you rotate it. It's exactly the same. There's no discomfort. Like it's if the wheel pummel hurts you when you rotate the sword, and it creates any level of discomfort, then it just means that the sword is not made correct. Right? It's
Or
not you.
not-
It's not you. The
or
problem.
the sword's not for you.
It's sword being the problem. And there are so many bad reproductions these days that you're just going to go off your impression on bad reproductions rather than this is a good reproduction, right? It's
People
a bad
about
business product, business practice, right? But it's a good product, right? Like if you take the original Royal Armory's Type 58 long sword, it's a good sword, right? It's a good design
Mhm.
because they think about this when they fought in the 15th century with gauntlet on.
Mhm.
Okay, so they saw it through the geometry of this wheel pummel reflects it. So I think like you're gonna love you.
There have been some wheel pommels that don't feel bad, and so when I think of wheel pommels, right, there are some, like many, that I like the look of, and don't get me wrong, like it's not that I hate them. I don't know that I've ever had a Viking sword that felt good in my hands, and incidentally, Brazil nuts are right in that category. I'm finding too, because I'm playing with one. I just went out and cut a bunch of beer cans with a Brazil nut pommel, and it's fine generally. But then like all of a sudden it flops into the box that you were trying not to hit and like jams into your wrist. And I was like, okay, yep. That, like Brazil nuts, not happy. But so sometimes sometimes they look good and they just don't feel right even when you pick them up.
I need to ship you my Albion Reef. That Brazil nut pummel on that thing, it's amazing. It feels better than most set stopper pummel.
Maybe they could be, but there's things that like look good and just don't feel good. Then there's stuff that feels good when you initially pick it up, but it fails when you hit something hard with it. When all that wheel pommel force is jammed into the fat of your hand when you hit something and that sword transitions that force into you. Then I notice a lot of them, like the Brazil nut on this KC Lund sword that I'm playing with. It feels really nice when I just generally move it around. If I start getting it going really fast, I feel like a little bit of friction on my hand. But when I went to go hit hard stuff, I was like, oh, okay. Wrist shock. Okay. Yep. That Brazil nut, like it's not, it has little pointy bits that poked into me and I did not like the sensation at all. I think they can be though. Like there's wheel pommels that have felt good even when I hit things with them, and I'm usually just kind of surprised by that. It doesn't happen often.
The thing is that most Brazil nut pummel and wheel pummels are done wrong on reproductions because it's supposed to be tapered, right? Like it's the thickness should be just right. It should lock in your hand with your pinky, but it should not like have a lot of friction when you rotate the sword, cast the sword out. And that's often done wrong. So, I mean, I suppose there are some original swords like that too, but most of the modern reproductions are done wrong. But if you handle some of the big, like better ones, like the Albion Yarrow, like Albion Reef, it's so natural. Like it's so comfortable.
That's a good looking.
Like when you cut with it, and after cutting with, like I anticipated some friction during cutting, right? Because you look at that.
Yeah.
Oh, if you look at use a
Right.
hammer grip, it's gonna like destroy your wrist. No, it doesn't. It rests on the side of your wrist. It's just fine. It's more comfortable and it's secure. Like everything is perfect. Right? Like and you wouldn't have thought of it just looking at it. Sure. Right. But it is the case, right? Like I think that if I ship you some of the like a better
the
reproduction,
problem I run into with
blow your mind.
like finding a wheel pommel or a Brazil nut, or if I held a Viking sword and I was like, wow, I like the feel of this, like it'd be a novelty and like neat, but I don't know that it would add to my experience other than like, hey, I do like one. I guess I'm not like bigoted against Viking pommels anymore. Maybe, you know, like no. Anyway, I just don't feel like risking it. Like I like scent stopper pommels, I like fishtail pommels. Those pretty consistently, even when done poorly, feel solid in my hand. And they're made in such a way that the shock doesn't seem to transition into the parts of my hand that leave me bloody. So as a buyer, as a collector too, right? If I go out and buy something, like your word that, hey, this feels nice is meaningful. It'd be fun to check out. But I'd also be like, nah, I might like this, but I'm definitely gonna like,
Right.
you know,
For sure.
So what's your guys' experience, like in terms of Viking Age or early medieval types of pummels?
Well, you know, we have a funny story about that, don't we? It's
Yeah,
almost
yeah.
like I didn't patch something behind this on purpose. Right?
Yeah.
Here, John, would you like to tell the story?
Well, the thing is, I've never held a Viking sword before, and I just had it in kind of a loose, kind of handshakey.
Yeah, the
sort of
DSA
grip.
one.
Yeah, it was the dark.
Can I hold it?
Yeah, grab it.
Just go grab whatever you want.
And so I was standing over
Crazy.
on that side of the kitchen over there, and I was sort of just moving it around in my hand, and all of a sudden, it basically put me in a wrist lock, like an Aikido wrist lock, with the pommel and the cross guard, and like disarmed me and fired the sword across the room and stuck it in the wall.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, this very sword right here.
I
Yeah.
have an amazing picture of John looking at the sword while the sword is in the wall, and he's just like, "Oh shit!" Now, obviously, thank the All Father, nobody was around and got impaled.
Yeah. But yeah, so I could argue that I'm not the biggest fan of Viking era sword.
And that also, and that was the pilot episode of John
John
does
does
stupid shit with swords. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
available on our Patreon when we get one.
Yeah.
So I like them aesthetically, but same thing, like they don't feel that good.
Agreed.
Because even like that DSA one and like the Reeve, they do kind of slope down and hug your hand a little bit better. But the ones that are really flush, which to my understanding, most of them were.
Could be, yeah.
And when you have them in hammer grip, I get the point. I get why they go that way. It just doesn't feel good. And that's probably 100% me not understanding how to move the sword around correctly. Never feels good at all.
You use it like this.
It's
Yeah.
also specifically for one motion, right? It's a chopping sword over the top of a shield wall. So it's not, you're not doing fencing moves with it. So it's
Do you hold it like this, like when you
With a handshake grip. So like I've tried the handshake grip and it feels better, but it's still, but to me, and this is again, I'm a novice, I don't know what I'm doing. Handshake grips don't feel very secure to me.
Right.
So I'm worried that the swords are gonna go flying. And that's the thing that I need to work on. But they don't. So go ahead, Kyle.
What I find with handshake grips is you're securing the grip mostly with these two fingers. This finger does some of the securing, and then these fingers power the cut. But once you actually power it, that's when you get a nice strong grip on it.
Okay.
Yeah. And then with Viking swords, what I found at least, I haven't done a ton of them because again, I think they look great, but I'm not a huge fan of their handling. But what I find is there's times when I'm using them and it's like, oh, that's how they're supposed to be used, where the pommel rotates against the palm perfectly, and it's just super easy. But it's very easy to screw that up and have it bite the hell out of
you're
your
gonna
hand.
hurt your wrist if you rotate like this.
That's exactly what happened. Is
And there's the impact. Your wrist is
So
down.
Exactly.
There's a lot.
That's also a problem with a lot of inaccurate reproductions is their grips are too long, so they don't work the way they're supposed to work.
Exactly.
That said, though, aesthetically, I like the look of them. I like the multi-lobe look. Like they're pretty. They're just not quite my thing. Personal favorite is Scent Stopper, followed closely by Fishtail in terms of looks and functionality for me.
I think Fishtail is great because Matt Easton talked about the use of wheel pommel before, like a few days ago. He said that it's really like the reassuring when you need to pull something from your side, like you're
exactly where it is,
like a
exactly
close range.
Like
Scent Stopper pommel is just not that reliable. Like you can flip up. Oh,
right.
I have
But
nothing.
however, it's so pretty though.
Yeah,
they are very pretty.
It is.
But it's that fish show. Oh, dude. If you're not subscribed to my channel, that's not going to cost you any money. You subscribe to Unsheathed Sword Reviews, I will send you that picture.
That's my friend Jesse.
Huh?
That's my friend Jesse.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
This is not.
You'll get it for free then.
I anticipated worse.
No, it's not bad.
It's
No,
not
I
bad.
like that sword. Except that it came covered
Yeah.
in rust and
Well,
with the
let's do
epoxy
that.
oozing out of it. Yeah,
If we
no.
don't talk
Yeah.
about customer
Yeah,
service
it's
company,
great
tell
now.
that story.
Except that DSA, and then when I messaged them about the issues, they told me to go fuck myself. And not so many words.
The footer is a little bit narrow,
Yeah,
but like the geometry is
it's not bad.
generally okay. Yeah, like if I can get it in the frame, it's not bad. Like
That's yeah.
it's not
If
a
it came in super shitty
like,
condition, I had to do all the work myself.
What's that? What'd you
Your
say,
story
Matt?
about dog sword gives me the chuckles.
Yeah.
Like sometimes they just blame it all on customers.
Yeah.
Say you misused it, you this, you that. Like it's one thing to have a conversation on proper usage.
Right.
It's something like entirely else. Like
It's another thing when I message them and I'm like,
Right.
hey, epoxy is coming out of every orifice. And they're like, well, if you weren't so fucking stupid, you would have figured out how to clean that. I'm like, okay, well, my bad.
Yeah, and like then they send you the whole like, oh, it's a handmade item, it's not going to be perfect. Like,
Yeah.
no, we get that, we understand that. We have
Yeah.
many other swords.
Right.
It should be within certain tolerances, though. If the blade has an S curve,
Yeah.
that's not within tolerances, even for a handmade item. Yeah.
However, now I like the sword. It's very
Yeah,
cleaned up. I'll
exactly.
never buy another one from them though. But I do like
I'm
the
not a
sword
fan
now.
of DSA in general, but this is not bad.
No, do you see why I liked them when I first started collecting? I was like,
Yeah.
okay, no, they're nice swords.
It's
Yeah.
not a Belgian Yarrow, but
No.
it's pretty good.
It's also not $1,800.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
right,
Yeah.
right. For this amount of
So here's an interesting comment. We got a random wish for the repro market. LK Chen does a pole war. I think
Oh,
they
yeah.
don't tilt really well. That would definitely be interesting. There's like no reproductions of pole war or Tolwar or anything other than the cold steel.
Right.
There's
More
a pretty
fun than
significant number of
Windlass.
sellers in India that operate on like WhatsApp and Facebook group that sell,
Yeah,
they're of, you're not quite sure what you're going to get though. It would be nice
exactly.
to have a little bit more like, yeah, I'm pretty confident this isn't going to come apart.
He's gone. Let grab his sword.
Right? They actually did already do one cup hilt too, so I mean that would translate well their ability to do that. So definitely.
Yeah. Do that. Like if LK,
Sign-
KK,
sign-
LK
yeah, right,
is
right.
in the stream, please.
Well, they would
Back
have,
up you.
I imagine they would have to get access to an original because
Like if you have seen any pole wars like pommel,
Yeah.
it looks so much more comfortable than tall wars.
Yeah, I don't. We did a review on a cold steel Tolwar, I think, and we didn't like it very much at all. It was that's because we don't know how to move the sword, but still, definitely, it's not intuitive for somebody that's used to using long swords or even Chinese swords or anything
Right.
like that. Not intuitive at all.
I reviewed that tall war. It's one of my the top performance video
Yeah.
because a lot of Indian people
Yeah,
watch
yeah.
that.
Oh, that makes sense.
But you know what? I cut really well with it.
Mhm.
Afterwards, my wrist had a bruise.
Yep.
For a month. Oh come on!
Yeah.
you really
Maybe
have
it was
to.
my fault, but
I think there's a whole different kind of style of movement you have to do. It's like from the shoulder with a locked elbow.
yeah,
It's like a whole weird different cut thing.
it's
There we go.
Oh, look at
There
that.
we go.
What's that? Oh yeah.
Nice.
And yeah.
Yep.
And these
Yeah.
are very small. They can lock in your hand.
Yep.
Okay, just
Yeah.
lock completely.
This is like basically most of the things that I don't like about a Viking sword, but tamed down a lot.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And it at least makes a little bit more sense. Like, I guess the way it moves, but I feel like I can get my wrist out there. It stops me a little bit, but yeah. And then the Polwar, it also doesn't have the same like jam into your wrist kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they're neat swords. Stuff is falling over.
One thing I'd say about the fact that people want to, or you would want a reproduction of it, is that they're one of the more widely available antiques for relatively decent prices.
Yeah.
Now, that leans into, do you want to cut with an antique? And that's a topic that is that's a whole can of worms to get into. But there's definitely a lot of Talwar, less Polwar, but a lot of Talwar is available that you can find quite easily for $200, $300 actually.
But even if you buy one for $200, are you gonna cut with it? You're gonna sharpen it up
Like once maybe.
One time,
Yeah.
for sure. Just cause.
like a
Yeah.
hot water bottle. You're gonna diminish the antique. That's disrespectful.
Even the Mona Lisa's falling apart.
I would like to say yes to LK Chin making all the swords.
Yes,
Whatever they want to
absolutely,
make,
for
I
sure.
support this.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree with that. And even though I've probably had more problems with or bad luck with LK Chen swords than just about anybody
Yeah, what
but
did you
Matt.
do to them?
Literally every time. Like every time. I feel so bad for you.
Yeah.
We're like, this sword is great. It's the best edge I've ever felt on
Yeah.
a sword. And you're like, yeah, mine's not even sharp.
And I was like, I'm not surprised anymore at this point. At this point, it's just a joke.
But the new Tom Guard sword is good, right?
Yes.
Did you get like exchange?
Yeah. Yes, and the new one is the edge is outstanding on that.
I have had a few pieces that did not go according to plan with LK Chen. At the same time, like I think I'm generally pretty complimentary of LK Chen, despite the things that have, the bumps in the road that I've had. But that's because that's how I would describe them, right? It seems like the feedback was sent and received, and improvements were made, and that they genuinely want to like make a good product, and you see that iterative improvement, at a pretty fast pace, right? It's not like you say something and then they've made such a large batch of things that it's years before the next thing happens. And I understand how sometimes that's how it works, right? You're making 1,000 swords and you got to sell through them, and unfortunately, all the 1,000 that you have, unless there's something egregious, like you're kind of stuck with what you've got. But yeah, LK Chen has done some pretty good stuff. There's never been one that I held that I thought was like really dumb. Some of them broke in ways that were not great, and it sounds like they've made steps to improve them. But there's also a couple that I've held that are just joys. The Chujian, the magnificent Chujian, is one that I always like. I pick it up and it's very smile inducing. And that Valor Arms collaboration that they did recently, like kind of made me rethink if I like the Type 12s there.
Yep.
However, though, quick pause. Sorry, I'm going to circle back to the previous conversation and just give this to everybody. Look at this little
Screenshot.
Look at that. There you go. See that? Yeah. He's just like, oh, well, shit. Yeah.
What is that?
It's a shame you didn't hit the shield.
Oh,
Deck the wall with the shield.
That happened. Yep.
Did you fill in the hole, or is it there? Like, did you?
I'm leaving it there on purpose.
The hole is still there.
It's still there on purpose. It is right under the
You gotta put
sword reviews.
Yeah, we weren't even a channel yet.
Yeah,
we were
we
just
weren't even a
stupid
channel
dudes with
yet.
swords.
it's gonna add like to the overall value when you sell the property.
Yeah, right.
You got to get a framed picture of it with like right below it, and then like put a little frame around it. Just an empty frame, so that it highlights the hole in the wall.
It's like the restaurants that put the $1 bill, the first dollar bill they got up on the wall.
Right.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Also, hey, kids, don't do that.
Right. That's an idea.
When I do like cutting events, or like introduce people to swords that are going to cut with stuff, the first rule, well, usually it's like, stop touching my swords, and I explain that like you have to ask before you touch them. So good on you, Kane. Usually the way I describe it is that touching a sword is just like touching another guy's dick, and it's not a no, but it is a definitely ask first. So it's
Vic was like,
that's good form.
touch any of mine. Yeah.
No, but you didn't hear it on the mic because I'm like, yeah, touch whatever you want. And then I was like, phrasing, like, wow.
Yeah.
I think I remember you saying you would punch a child in the face too for some reason. Like if you give it to them, say,
That's my
If
favorite.
they're children, I do tell their parents, like, I will punch you in the face, because you are prone to like be like, this is cool. I'll be like, hey, can your kid hold a sword? And then they're like, yeah, that's fine. I'm like, okay, but they're an adult as soon as I hand it to them. And if you swung a sword at me, I'd punch you in the face. So if your 6-year-old swings a sword at me, I'm going to punch him in the face.
Which
And not
is
like a child punch in the face. I'm going to man punch him in the face. So like, we're good.
Which
You
is
sure you
my
want me to hold it?
favorite out of context quote ever. Because
Yeah.
even in context, it's hilarious. But out of context, Matthew Jensen says,
Matthew Jensen says, 6-year-old, I'm going to man punch you in the face. Yep, that's how it works. Yeah, the first rule, other than like stop touching it, put it down, ask first, is don't drop the sword. Step one, don't drop the sword. No helicopters of death.
also, why is it, maybe this is just my experience, but like anybody that like I give swords to who doesn't know about swords, their first fucking thing is like, oh, just let me just rub my finger
like,
just
oh, look
all
at
over
this,
the
I'm
blade.
gonna touch
It
it
touched the
everywhere.
whole
Like, yeah,
fucking, and I was like,
what is
that's
that
cool.
about?
Thanks. I
What is
appreciate that
about?
so much.
Like the most common question I get from bringing swords into like public space is that,
Is it
Are you crazy?
Wow, no. Is it real? Is it sharp?
Mhm.
Do
Yeah.
you watch Forged in Fire?
Yeah, dude. I get so. They just assume you love Forged in Fire, right? I'm like, I do, but I'm annoyed that you're right.
Right.
Stereotyping, but accurate.
Yeah.
And I love it.
Yeah, I
You
had
wanna
an
watch it with me?
ex-girlfriend at the time. She was my girlfriend at the time, but like she gets the sword and she's like, "Ooh, there's all this weird oil on it," and I'm like, "We're not going to work out."
Yeah, I do have a story about that. I used to have like the first really expensive sword that I got. Well, like really, really expensive. First like custom project I had was a blade from Howard Clark. And so our, starting off the custom run of things pretty high up there, right? And I had it like on a stand and like tucked away in the bedroom. And it was not my wife's favorite, but I was like, it's my most precious possession. Anyway, for whatever reason, like my mother-in-law was showing the sword to somebody and like didn't tell me. And they're like a smudge got on it. And then like I didn't notice because I keep it in oil and like I don't check it every day. So there's a big rusty fingerprint and it needed to be repolished. And I was like, what the? Yeah. So nobody ever touched a sword ever again. That was basically.
Did they find your mother-in-law's body?
She survived the experience, but there was a very stern talking to. So if you think like it's out of uncommon to be told, I will man punch you in the face, 6-year-old, when even close family rusts your swords, there's a pretty stern talking to. No faces were punched, but stern words were said.
Hey, Matt, just say, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying it's freaking hilarious.
Exactly.
I am
Yeah.
team punch 6-year-olds in the face. That's a quote.
It's I actually found it to be really effective though, right?
A killable child in Skyrim.
Exactly. Yep. You are correct.
The kids usually respond really well with like, as soon as you hold this, you're a grown-up, right? Like you are indistinguishable from your parent that gave you permission because you're holding a deadly object. And like, I can't not like, usually there's some confined area where it's like, if you decide to just, do tornado ninja move, it's going to hurt me. And so I'm not going to like, that's not, nope. Hard pass. So there's, I'm going to stand in front of you and I'm going to punch you in the face. So don't. And when I say that and I look at the dad and everyone kind of is like, that's not a nice thing to say. I'm like, right, but I'm serious because you've just agreed to let your child hold a deadly weapon, right?
Right.
And it's the same thing if you like go to a firing range and you're teaching a child. It's like, hey, point this way. If you point it at a person, they're going to punch you in the face, or they might like very sternly and quickly move you out of the way. But
I have the complete opposite experience. Like I got some minor guests at my house, like my children's friends. I asked them, "Do you want to handle the sword? Like I can teach you how to safely handle the sword." They're like, "No, I don't want to accidentally chop my toes or stab someone." Yeah, so they're pretty.
I mean,
like I even get like a guest who wants to buy a sword, like legitimately seeking a sword buyer's guidance, coming to my place, and he refused. He's not gonna handle any of my stuff. And I said, "Wow, you're such a responsible individual. You should own a sword."
And you're like,
"Here, take a sword."
Yeah, that has not been my experience. The kids usually are interested. If there's like a martial arts event and I go, and sometimes like the dojos will put on events and you'll have your swords for like cutting demonstrations behind a rope. People go around it and like pick them up and start touching them and licking them. You're like, hey, just so you know, like I'll fucking kill you. Like put that down.
I'm sorry, Matt. I'm laughing at the comment.
What's that?
No, look, it's on the screen. You pulled it up. Look at it.
Yeah.
I would like to answer first. Fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
My kids like messaged me. Are you guys in a
Yeah.
pub?
I don't think it would be a very good salesman at a Renfest. No. A lot of respect. I do see the people selling at Renfest, and they like hand the sword, and they're like, "Okay, keep it over the table," and then immediately like they point it and like wave it at the person in front of them. Like, dude, it's fucking deadly. Like you can hurt somebody.
So that's the disconnect. I think like in modern times, people understand guns are deadly weapons for the most part. People understand don't fuck around with them. But for some reason, they don't get that with swords. Like they don't get it. It's like, hey, this is a thing designed to murder. Don't point it at me.
Yeah.
The thing is, they're not raised up with inherent fear or respect for swords because they're such esoteric objects for the vast majority of people. So they don't have that inherent sense of this is a deadly weapon.
Yeah.
Well,
It doesn't exist with firearms either.
A lot of people
That part
don't.
too.
Yeah.
When people,
I was being generous.
when people
Yeah, well, I say that there's a thing that happened a while ago where I was doing, and this isn't mood lighting. My child has gotten a hold of the Google Assistant and like changes the lights in the room randomly. So
You tell yourself whatever you want, buddy. That's mood lighting.
yeah. Okay, let me tell this story. No, many moons ago, I was wrapping up my university thing, and I had this fluffy thing to do at the end. And the topic of conversation that got chosen was: should people be able to should students be allowed to carry firearms at the university? And at the time, there were like a bunch of armed robberies, and I took night classes in the parking lot. That was the only place for me to really park if I wanted to go to class. Had like an armed robbery every night while I was at class. They were like, should you be able to carry a firearm? Anyway, most of the students had no idea about firearms, never held one, and had some opinions about if people should or shouldn't, but had never shot one, never done anything. So I thought, well, let's go do it, right? We can't go to a gun range and do everything. That's not going to a gun range is not the place to learn 101. You have to do the like, how do I safely do stuff? Then you can go and safely do stuff. Mm-hmm. So we went to my house, and I was like, all right, I'll show you how to do it. We'll take an hour, maybe an hour and a half, and then we'll go to the gun range. Now the gals sat down and were like, hey, I see firearms. I'm going to sit here and wait for instruction. And the guys, without knowing anything about firearms, having said, I've never picked one up, I've never shot one, picked them up, started, putting their finger right on the trigger on one of them, and it's got a pretty sensitive trigger. It definitely would have shot up the house if it was loaded, and started taking selfies and geotagging the location of my home and my firearms. And so naturally, I'm not a great Renfair sword salesman, so I had some stern words to say. But like, no, there was no common sense. There was barrel sweeping. There was like all manner of, hey, grown ass man who's still in, a child mind in a grown ass man's body. Gun always points this way. If there was a jam, they'd like turn around and sweep the room and be like, hey. And I was like, oh God, why are you so dumb? Why hasn't natural selection taken you?
I think you might have
there's not necessarily a common sense or like a respect of firearms that like death comes out this end. There's still a ton of people that if nobody's punched you in the face before, if you haven't like barrel swept somebody and had them say like, don't do that, you won't do it again. Like then you don't have that respect.
We were just talking, like we were driving back. We're talking like there are so many more firearm related accidents on screen, right? Just in YouTube sphere, people have their bazooka exploding in their face. People have 50 cal exploding in their face, and there's very little safety precaution. I mean, there are safety precautions taken, right? Like, but they are not respecting the deadliness, the potential danger. Like something can be designed as a weapon.
Like it says in the Two Towers, right? The burned hand teaches best. And literally, you can't, like, nobody cuts themselves on swords that often anymore because nobody has any fucking swords.
Right.
But having cut myself on swords,
I've done that too.
it absolutely terrifying. Totally. Like, it's terrifying.
Fingers.
How badly you can hurt yourself just by accident by doing a stupid little thing. And imagine, like, if someone was just like rah, 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 at you, like that's your death.
Right.
So yeah, no, we know because we know what like when your finger slides this much up on the blade and you're like, oh shit, that's my bone. Do you know what I mean? Most people haven't had that experience. They have no comprehension.
That's a really good point. Yeah, because even just like moving swords around, we've accidentally like bumped or nicked them, or like bumped them, and like they nick you all of a sudden, and you're
like,
bleeding. Oh. Not bad, but it's like from a light little touch, you're like, oh shit, like that was So that's a good point. And then you do the Matthew Jensen punch, and that teaches them not to do it.
Exactly.
Like I have a friend who was oiling up a gladius recently, and he sliced 3 of his fingers to the point where he needs surgery to reattach severed nerves. And it was just
PR for that.
Well, yeah. So if you don't have that kind of experience, you don't have that inherent respect for how deadly they can be.
Yeah,
he was packing an Albion Fury. Like we all know that Fury is not a cutting-oriented sword.
No.
Matt, you reviewed that, right? Like it's not something you associate with like
prolific cutter.
Formidable cutting power. And he's just putting on a tip protector, and then he slipped. And then the next thing happened is that he's in ER. Like,
thank you for making me
like 26 stitches.
Thanks for making me feel sketched out about oiling all of these later.
Right?
The cleaning day is not a multitasking event.
No,
right?
that is not a thing while you're having.
Like I want to watch a movie and clean. No,
don't. And also, word of don't do that while having a beer. Like that is a sober task.
Advisably sober.
On that rather sobering thought, I think we're going to wrap it up here. We've been going for about 2 hours now, and I think I've heard my cat banging on my door like at least 4 different times throughout this video. So she wants into this room, and she's going to break the door down pretty soon, I think.
Fair.
You don't have nearly enough weapons to defend yourself against a cat, so it's time to go.
I want to say thank you to Matthew for jumping on. Thank you, Vic, John, Kane for coming in. This was a lot of fun. And I think there was a lot of really cool discussion. So thanks for everybody. If you haven't, I can't imagine you aren't familiar with Matthew Jensen or Kane or Unsheathed Sword Reviews. But if you haven't, make sure you check out the channels. The links are in the description. So thanks, everybody. And we are going to call it there.
Thanks, Kyle. Thanks, everyone.
Excellent.